The median 60-year-old in America has $87,000 saved in their 401k. Not $800,000, not $200,000, $87,000. And that number comes from Vanguard's How America Saves report, drawn from data on nearly 5 million actual plan participants. The magic number Americans say they need to retire comfortably in 2026 is $1.46 million. The average retiree today has $288,000. That is not a funding gap. That is a structural collapse dressed in a business casual shirt. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what 60-year-olds have saved, why the actual number is so much lower than anything you've seen reported, and the part that rewrites the whole problem. What happens to the nearly half of all workers who had a plan to fix it and never got to execute it? Here is the thing about retirement data. The financial media has a habit of reporting the number that tells the cleanest story. They reach for averages. Averages feel like progress. Averages let you write a headline that says, 401k balances hit all-time record, while 53 million people are sitting on less than $50,000 and quietly assuming they'll figure it out later. I don't do that. I read the boring documents so you don't have to. And what the boring documents say is far more interesting and more specific than the headline version. I'm going to walk you through 4 things today. The first is what the numbers actually say versus what gets reported. The second is the planning assumption you've been making about retirement that has roughly a coin flip's chance of being correct. The third is a cost you've almost certainly never calculated that has been silently amputating your compounding since your 30s. And the fourth is the math on the backup plan, the one that tens of millions of Americans are counting on that has a printed expiration date on it. Before I go any further, think of your retirement savings as a bridge. You've been building it your entire working life, plank by plank, paycheck by paycheck. The promise is that when you're ready to cross, when work is done, the bridge connects the working world on one side to the rest of your life on the other. Solid, continuous, enough span to make it all the way. The problem is that most people get to 60 and find out their bridge stops in midair. Not gradually, not on a ramp, just ends. And there's open water between where they are and where they thought they were going. I'm going to use this bridge throughout the video because the bridge gets complicated in ways that are not obvious. And by the end, I want you to understand exactly what determines whether yours reaches the other side. Before I get into the real depth of what the numbers reveal and why the gap is so much wider than any calculator is showing you, I need to plant something first. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you why the problem is not that people didn't save enough. That is a symptom. The actual problem is something that happens before the saving that distorts the entire strategy. But first, let's deal with what the numbers actually look like when you pull the curtain back. The headline version of retirement savings is built on means averages. According to Vanguard's How America Saves 2025 report, the average 401k balance for workers age 55 to 64 is approximately $271,000. That is the number that makes the rounds. It gets shared in workplace newsletters. Your HR department uses a version of it at open enrollment. It sounds like not great, but workable. It is also almost meaningless as a description of where most people actually stand. The median balance for that same age group, $96,000. Let that land for a moment. $96,000. Half of all workers aged 55 to 64 who have a 401k have less than that saved. The gap between $271,000 and $96,000 exists because of extreme skew at the top. According to data from WealthView, the 90th percentile 401k balance for the 55 to 64 age group is $904,200, more than 10 times the median. A relatively small number of 6- and 7-figure accounts drag the arithmetic mean upward and create the illusion of broad-based retirement readiness that does not exist. Here is how bad the distortion is when you use the broader picture. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, which is the most comprehensive household wealth study in the country, puts the median retirement savings across all account types for Americans aged 55-64 at $185,000. That includes IRAs, pensions, 401ks, everything. Better than 96,000. But then apply the benchmark. Fidelity's guideline says by age 60, you should have 8 times your current salary saved. The median household income for Americans in their early 60s is approximately $67,704 a year. 8 times. That is $541,632. The median American approaching retirement has $185,000. That is a $356,000 shortfall before inflation, before healthcare costs, before the retirement age you plan for and the one you'll actually get. Now here's the layer the averages obscure entirely. According to Clever Real Estate's 2026 Retirement Statistics Survey, 29% of Americans have nothing saved for retirement. Not a little, not a token amount, zero, nothing. And of current retirees specifically, over a quarter, 29%, say they don't expect to have the financial resources to cover their own funeral costs, up 5 percentage points from 2025. 92% of retirees say people underestimate how much money they'll need. 51% say they have no plan for what happens if the savings run out. There is a particular data point from the Motley Fool's 2026 retirement research that I find clarifying. Only 5% of households with retirement accounts have $1 million or more saved. Only 5%. So the $1 million retirement narrative, the one that's baked into most planning advice, most wealth management pitches, most retire comfortably framing, describes the experience of 1 in 20 households. The other 19 are building different bridges on different timelines with different amounts of material. Here is the psychological damage the average does. When someone sees the average 401k reported at $244,000 for their age group and they have $112,000, they feel behind. They feel like failures. They recalibrate their ambition downward. I'm not quite on pace, but I'm not terrible. I'll grind another few years and catch up. And that recalibration, I'll grind a few more years, is the exact assumption that this next part is about to dismantle. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Stay with me. Because here's what I mean when I say the savings gap is the symptom. Most people think the problem is the number in the account. The real problem sits upstream of that it's a planning assumption with a 50% failure rate. And almost no retirement calculator in existence accounts for it, honestly. Here's the assumption. I will work until 65, sometimes 67, sometimes even 70, because every additional year you delay Social Security past full retirement age adds 8% to your lifetime benefit. And that math is genuinely hard to argue with. The plan depends on those extra years. It needs them for continued contributions. It needs them for one more market run-up. It needs them for the accumulated catch-up contributions that are only available to workers age 60 through 63 under Secure 2.0 $35,750 per year. A provision designed specifically for people in exactly this position. That plan work until 65, squeeze every contribution in, then cross-works beautifully on a spreadsheet. It fails for approximately half of all Americans in real life. According to the 2026 Employee Benefit Research Institute Retirement Confidence Survey, 46% of Americans who retired last year left the workforce earlier than they had originally planned. The Allianz Life Center for the Future of Retirement, in their 2026 annual retirement study, found that 42% of retirees stopped working sooner than planned. The Society of Actuaries Retirement Risk Survey puts the number even higher at 59%. These 3 independent research organizations, measuring the same phenomenon from different methodologies, are all pointing at the same reality. Roughly half of the people who planned to work to 65 did not get to. And when EBRI looked at why, they found that 76% of those early exits were driven by events entirely outside the worker's control. 41% cited a health problem or disability, up from 31% the prior year. 35% were pushed out by corporate changes, downsizing, business closures, restructuring. 20% left for family reasons, including caregiving demands that most people do not plan for in their financial models. Think about a man, I'll call him Kevin, because there are a lot of Kevins in this story, who has spent 35 years in manufacturing. He is 58. His 401k has about $90,000. Not great, but not catastrophic, because Kevin has a plan. If he can contribute the super catch-up maximum from age 60 to 63 and keep his existing balance growing, his bridge extends. He has 7 years of runway, 7 years of the highest earning potential of his career, the most tax-advantaged contribution window ever created, and a realistic path to a decent retirement. Then his plant gets acquired, new ownership, cost rationalization. At 59, he's offered a buyout. He does not want it. He wants to stay and run out his clock. But he has watched 3 other men his age get managed out over 18 months on the same floor, and he knows what's coming. He takes the buyout. And instead of 6 more years of peak catch-up contributions, Kevin has 0. His bridge stops exactly where it stopped the day he cleaned out his desk. This is not an edge case. Only 12% of workers plan to retire before 60. Yet, according to EBRI data, 29% of retirees actually left the workforce by that age. The divergence between what people planned for and what happened to them is more than double. The median expected retirement age, according to the 2025 EBRI survey, is 65. The median actual retirement age is 62. 3 years, persistently, across multiple decades of surveys. And the financial planning industry's response to all of this is essentially work longer. There's a reflexive solution embedded in most retirement advice. The idea that anyone who is behind on savings should simply extend their working years. 80% of Americans told Allianz they believe delaying retirement would strengthen their finances. They're not wrong. But Craig Copeland, Director of Wealth Benefits Research at EBRI, addressed this directly. That clearly won't solve all the problems because many people just can't do it. Let me add one more layer to this before moving on. The forced early retirement dynamic does not hit everyone equally. Among retirees with less than $35,000 in annual retirement income, 49% cited health as the reason for early retirement. Among higher income retirees earning above $75,000, health-driven early departures were only 22%. The people who need the runway most are the ones most likely to have it cut short. Wealthier workers retire early by choice, lower income workers retire early by circumstance. The retirement system, as it is currently designed, rewards people who needed the least help. This also brings up the gender arithmetic, which is its own structural problem, layered on top of everything else. Women have 39% less saved at retirement on average compared to men. They retire 2 years earlier on average, and they live 5.3 years longer than men on average. The same bridge that's already shorter has to cross a wider river. Here's the actual part nobody's calculator builds in correctly. Your retirement plan should model 2 scenarios, not 1. The one where you work to 65 as planned, and the one where you stop at 62 because your back gives out, or your company gets absorbed, or your mother needs full-time care. That second scenario is not a worst case. It is, statistically speaking, almost as likely as the first. If your entire financial plan depends on the optimistic timeline surviving intact, you are running a 50-50 bet on your financial security without knowing you're betting. Here is where I want to tell you about a tool I built specifically because of this problem. The gap between knowing these numbers and actually building a system around them is enormous, and I had that gap myself for years. I had data, I had spreadsheets. None of it became a framework until I forced the math into an actual decision structure. I put together a digital book called The Exit Code, 8 chapters of retirement research built around one central goal, turning someday, maybe, into a specific date, and making sure that date survives contact with reality. 2 things I want to highlight for this specific video. First, the 58% rule. It's based on the forced early exit data, the idea that you need a buffer strategy built around the assumption that a meaningful portion of your runway gets removed. Not planning for it is how Kevin ends up with an empty bridge. Second, the dynamic withdrawal method, a mathematically grounded approach to drawing down your savings that replaces the 4% rule, which was designed for a different era and a different life expectancy. The book is built on 50 years of actual retirement data, not opinion. You can get it for less than an hour with a mediocre financial advisor through the link in the description. If everything you've heard in this video so far has rearranged anything in your planning, the exit code takes that rearrangement and turns it into a specific number, a specific date, and a specific sequence. Now, the savings gap is real. The forced early exit is real. But there is a third problem that has been operating in your account since you were 35. And it is almost certainly invisible to you because it does not show up as a line item. It shows up as the absence of money that should have been there. Here's the cost of fees. Not in the way everyone explains fees, oh, fees add up over time, but in the specific, compounded, numerical way that clarifies exactly what you have already lost and what you're still losing. A 0.9% difference in annual fees on a $100,000 investment compounded over 30 years with a 7% annual gross return costs approximately $165,800 in foregone wealth. According to research from the Institute of Business and Finance, the investor paying 1% instead of 0.1% in fees surrenders roughly 22.4% of potential ending wealth over 30 years. At 1.5%, the loss climbs to 32.7%. At 2%, which is closer to what many actively managed funds and advisor-wrapped accounts charge, when you include all layers, the investor forfeits more than 41% of what the portfolio would have produced. That is not a rounding error. That is the price of a car paid annually, compounded, disappearing into someone else's pocket rather than staying in yours. Here is the mechanical reason this happens in ways that are worse than most people intuit. Fee drag does not operate like a flat annual tax. It compounds against itself. The larger your base, the more the fee takes. A 1% fee on $200,000 is $2,000 a year. But it also means that $2,000, which reinvested, would compound at the same rate as the rest of your portfolio, is not there to compound. And the year after that, the fee is calculated on a base that should have been $2,000 higher. This repeats for 30 years. For investors using Vanguard or Fidelity index funds with expense ratios in the range of 0.03 to 0.05%, this is not a meaningful concern. But the average actively managed mutual fund in a workplace, 401k, has historically charged somewhere in the 0.6 to 1.2% range. And many advisor-wrapped accounts add another 50 basis points to a full 1% on top of that. So when a worker in their 30s starts a 401k, picks whatever target date fund is in the default list, and doesn't think about fees again for 30 years, they often end up paying 2 to 3 times more than they needed to pay for the same market exposure. The fix is not complicated. It is not exciting. It does not require special knowledge or access. The investor who simply holds a total market index fund with a 0.04% expense ratio, and the investor who holds the equivalent actively managed fund charging 1.2% will own similar underlying assets, take similar market risk, and end up with dramatically different balances at retirement. Fidelity data confirms this indirectly. The average balance for savers who've been investing in the same 401k continuously for 15 years was $617,600 at the end of 2025. That is not people who made extraordinary moves. That is people who stayed in the same plan, contributed consistently, and let time work. The fee-minimized version of that journey ends meaningfully richer. Now, let me introduce someone to track here, because this subplot becomes important. Kevin, our manufacturing worker who took the buyout at 59, didn't lose everything. He has 90,000. He also, thanks to his company's default enrollment, had been in an actively managed fund with a 1.1% expense ratio for 23 years. What nobody ran for him was the calculation of how much that fund's fees had cost him versus the index fund equivalent. Rough math. Approximately $60,000 to $70,000 over that period vanished in fee drag. His bridge wasn't just cut short by the layoff, it was shorter than it should have been even before the layoff, for a reason that no one in his company's benefits department had ever explained to him. Here's the comedic version of what this conversation sounds like. Your fund returned 6.2%, and the index, 6.8%. Okay, so I got slightly less for 23 years. Oh, that is it. That is the entire exchange that most people never have. Stay with me, because there is one more moving part to this, and it is the part that makes everything I've described more urgent by having a literal deadline printed on it. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you the math on Social Security timing and why it changes the calculus on everything. But first, I want to make sure the picture is complete on how the bridge actually works in practice, using a specific scenario with real numbers. Take a real specific person. She is 60. She has saved in total across accounts $185,000, the exact federal median for her age group. She takes Social Security at 62 because her savings cannot cover her living expenses, and she has no other income source. By claiming at 62 instead of waiting until full retirement age at 67, she locks in a 30% permanent reduction in her monthly benefit. The average benefit as of 2026 is $2,071 a month. At 62, she receives roughly $1,450 a month from Social Security instead. Over a 20-year retirement, that difference, the cost of claiming early because you had no alternative, is approximately $148,800 in lifetime Social Security income she will never receive. Now apply the 4% withdrawal rule to her $185,000 nest egg. That generates $7,400 per year, or $616 per month in portfolio income. Added to her reduced Social Security check, she has $2,066 per month to live on. The median monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the United States is now hovering around $1,500. That leaves her approximately $566 a month for food, transportation, healthcare, clothing, utilities, and every other recurring cost of human existence. And that scenario assumes she's in the better half, the half that has retirement savings at all. 29% of Americans have nothing. For them, Social Security at whatever age they claim, it is not a supplement, it is the entire floor. This is what the retirement crisis looks like at the median. Not destitution, as one researcher put it, not catastrophe, but a persistent year after year squeeze that forces trade-offs. Skipping the dentist, not refilling a prescription, not visiting the grandkids in Colorado because the flight costs $300. Now let's talk about the backup plan, the one that over 50% of American workers are counting on to fill the gap, the one that 78% of current retirees rely on to pay necessary expenses, the one that has an expiration date attached to it in federal actuarial documents that almost nobody reads. Social Security, specifically what the Social Security Trustees Report actually says. According to the SSA Trustees Report 2025, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to reach a shortfall point around 2035. At that point, if Congress takes no action, benefits could be reduced to approximately 83% of scheduled amounts. The average benefit in 2026 is $2,071 a month. 83% of that is $1,719. That is a $352 monthly cut per month for every month of retirement. For the millions of Americans for whom Social Security is the primary income source, that reduction is not an inconvenience. It is a material change in how they live. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget projects the shortfall could arrive even sooner, potentially by late 2032, and that a dual income couple retiring at the start of 2033 could face an $18,100 annual loss in expected benefits. And here's the thing. According to Bankrate's 2025 Retirement Savings Survey, 76% of American workers who plan to rely on Social Security are concerned they won't receive the full benefits they've been promised. They're right to be concerned. But only 39% say they have a specific plan for how they will handle Social Security claiming at all, according to Schroeder's 2025 U.S. Retirement Survey. Most people know it's a problem. Almost nobody has converted that knowledge into a strategy. The Social Security claiming decision is also where the psychology of money creates one of its most reliably expensive mistakes. Researchers at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and Cornell University found that people with a stronger sense of ownership of their Social Security benefits, the idea that the payments are mine, I earned them, were more likely to claim at 62, regardless of the financial cost of claiming early. This is loss aversion at work. The money feels like it's being withheld from you every month you wait. But every month you wait from 62 to 70 increases your lifetime payout through a combination of delayed retirement credits, 8% per year, and a larger base for cost of living. Adjustments. The person who waits until 70 receives roughly 77% more per month than the person who claimed at 62. Over a 25-year retirement, that compounding difference in monthly income runs well into six figures. Here's a comedic aside. The advice has been the same for 40 years. Wait as long as you can to claim Social Security. And the most common response is, yeah, but I might die early. This is mathematically rational for a small subset of people with serious health conditions. For most people, it is an anxiety-driven shortcut dressed up as pragmatism. The break-even point where delaying to 70 pays off relative to claiming at 62 is somewhere in the mid to late 70s for most people. And the average American life expectancy at 60 is still above 80. The math favors waiting. The psychology, as always, makes the expensive choice feel more comfortable. Kevin, from earlier, remember Kevin? At 59, with $90,000 and a forced buyout, Kevin's best move, mathematically, is to use his savings as a bridge income from 59 to 70 while delaying Social Security as long as possible. It requires careful spending during those 11 years. It requires a clear accounting of exactly how long his $90,000 will last at a controlled withdrawal rate. But by delaying his Social Security claim from 62 to 70, Kevin adds approximately $760 per month to his benefit permanently. Over a 20-year retirement, that is $182,400 of additional income, which is almost exactly twice his entire 401k balance at retirement. The bridge that looked too short becomes, with careful sequencing, just long enough. The key word is careful, and careful requires a framework, not a gut feeling. Here is what I want you to take away from everything we've covered. Not vague principles, specific, non-generic tools. 1. Stop benchmarking against the average. The Empower Personal Dashboard data from March 2026 puts the average retirement savings for Americans in their 60s at $1,228,000. That data comes from users of an active financial tracking platform, people who are engaged enough with their money to use a dashboard. That number is self-selected and deeply misleading as a description of where the typical 60-year-old stands. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, which captures everyone, including the disengaged and the asset poor, is the number you should be using. Benchmark against the median, not the mean, and against the gap to your actual income replacement needs, not some generic $100,000 target. 2. Build a 2-timeline retirement model. One timeline where you work until your planned date. One timeline where you stop 5 years early. Model both. If the early exit timeline is catastrophic, your plan has a coin flip chance of surviving intact. The specific buffer you need in the early exit scenario, the one that accounts for healthcare costs before Medicare kicks in at 65, for the gap years between forced exit and full Social Security, for the loss of the catch-up contribution window, is not something most planning tools calculate. It needs to be built deliberately. 3. The fee drag in your account is invisible until you run the math, at which point it is no longer invisible, it is enraging. Find out your total expense ratio. If you are in a target date fund, it is printed in the fund's prospectus. If it is above 0.25%, look for an index equivalent. The difference of 0.9% on a $200,000 starting balance over 25 years at a 7% gross return is approximately $90,000, the equivalent of adding another year of work to your retirement timeline, silently, forever, for no additional benefit to you whatsoever. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And the last thing I'll say is this. The numbers in this video are not there to scare you. They are there because you are more useful to yourself with accurate information than with comfortable distortions. The median 60-year-old in America is standing at the edge of a bridge that ends in midair, not because they failed, but because a system that was supposed to help them reach the other side was built in a way that serves the wrong people most efficiently. Understanding exactly where the bridge ends is the first step to figuring out whether you can still extend it. The math is not hopeless. Kevin's story is not over. But both of them require specific numbers, specific sequences, and specific decisions, not motivational language and a target date fund. Americans in their 60s have an average retirement savings balance of $1,228,196, according to Empower Personal dashboard data from March 2026, but the median is $568,116, and that figure is still drawn from a self-selected pool of financially engaged platform users. The average 401k balance for Americans ages 55 to 64 is $272,600, but the median, which represents the typical worker, is just $84,700. These gaps reflect extreme wealth concentration. A small number of workers with million-dollar balances pull the average far above what most people actually have saved. According to Vanguard's How America Saves 2025 report, the average account balance within defined contribution plans was $271,000 for people between ages 55 and 64, while the median account balance was nearly $96,000. The gap between the average and median suggests that higher balance savers pull the average upward, while the typical saver has far less set aside. That median is also a reminder of how undersaved many Americans are as they approach retirement. Currently, retirees have an average of just $288,700 saved, barely a third of the amount they feel new retirees require. Over a quarter of retirees, 29%, say they have no money saved for retirement at all. 92% of retirees say people underestimate how much money is needed to retire comfortably. The magic number Americans think they need to retire comfortably in 2026 is $1.46 million. Of the 54.3% of US households that have any money in retirement accounts, only about 9.3% have $500,000 or more in retirement savings. The Employee Benefit Research Institute and Greenwald Research found that 46% of Americans who retired last year left the workforce earlier than they originally planned. Unplanned health conditions and corporate restructuring were the two largest forces pushing workers out of their careers ahead of schedule, according to the 2026 EBRI survey. Among those who retired early, 41% cited a health problem or disability, up from 31% in 2025. Corporate changes, including downsizing, business closures, and reorganization, accounted for 35% of early retirements, making employer-driven disruption the second most common involuntary cause. According to the 2025 EBRI Retirement Confidence Survey, the median expected retirement age among workers is 65. The median actual retirement age among retirees is 62. That 3-year gap has persisted for decades across multiple surveys. EBRI found 76% of early retirements stemmed from events outside a worker's control, including illness, disability, layoffs, company closures, and caregiving demands. By year 30, the gap between a 0.1% and 1% fee on the same $100,000 investment reaches $165,800. That is not a linear progression. The investor paying 1% instead of 0.1% surrenders roughly 22.4% of potential ending wealth over 30 years. At 1.5%, the loss climbs to 32.7%. At 2%, the investor forfeits more than 41% of what the portfolio would have produced at near zero cost. Beneficiaries could face a 23% cut to their Social Security payments in about 8 years, according to the program's annual trustees report. Other analyses suggest the shortfall could arrive even sooner and be even bigger. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget projects that benefits could be reduced by 24% as early as late 2032, amounting to a roughly $18,100 annual loss for a dual-income couple retiring at the start of 2033. The SSA trustees report 2025 projects that if Congress takes no action, the trust fund will face shortfalls around 2035, and benefits could be cut to approximately 83% of scheduled amounts. For a retiree receiving $2,071 per month in 2026, that would mean a reduction to roughly $1,719 per month, a $352 monthly cut. The average balance for savers who've been investing in the same 401k continuously for 15 years was $617,600 and $465,000 for those saving for 10 straight years. According to Fidelity's fourth quarter 2025 data, about 3 in 5 American workers, 58%, say their retirement savings are behind where they should be. Of those, 37% say they're significantly behind where they should be, while 21% say they're slightly behind. Among survey respondents who've already retired, 62% admit they have no idea how long their savings will be able to last, and 58% said they wish they had done more planning before their retirement. More than half of retirees surveyed said they don't have any specific strategies for generating income in retirement.